So Brent Gardner from Elite Inspection Group will have a discussion today on mildew and mold. So I'm going to turn it over to him and set it up to share screen so you can see his information. So I'm going to turn the screen. Go ahead, Brent. It's on you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Brent Gardner. I'm from Elite Group Inspections, and we do mold inspections and we do air quality testing. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. We're going to talk about what the difference is between mold and mildew, how to identify it yourself visually, and how not to talk about it, to be honest with you. One of the things we try not to say is the word mold because we are never exactly sure that that's what the substance we see is, and that's what the tests are for. So we'll go over all of that. Are you looking for the share?
Yeah, we're on.
Okay,
We're shared.
perfect. Okay, excellent. So if you can just move forward just one real quick.
Yeah.
Okay, so mold or staining, irregular staining, microbial growth, those are some of the terms we've heard used. We prefer to use the generic term stain or irregular stain in a location. Just describe the location in the property. When you're filling out your ABIDs, you may walk through and see some of these things. When we go through the properties, we also keep our language very simple, but it can be a deal killer. You guys probably know this better than we do. When you have misconceptions about mold, there are drawbacks to mold, obviously, but we don't want this to kill the deal, and there are manageable ways to relate this to your buyer. One of the things is there's cost-effective treatments. Treatments used to cost a fortune, and they don't as much anymore. It depends on the situation, of course. And one of the key things is the language and identification of the substances we find in these homes. It's very important to keep things very low-key and manageable, basically for the sake of the client. One of the things we do in all of our inspections is manage the state of the client so that they don't feel overwhelmed. They don't feel like this is outside their realm of possibility to manage. Even if we find multiple defects in the home, we need to relate to them that this is manageable, this is doable. Should you purchase this home, you can handle these things, and here's how we recommend you do that. That's kind of how our approach is. Okay, so mold versus mildew. They are indeed two different things, but very often we talk about them as if they are one and the same. So let's get a little clarity here. There was an act put into law called the Label Law Act, and on many cleaners, industrial cleaners and pesticides and all kinds of things like that, they have added multiple terms on their products to let us know what it could clean or remove. Mold and mildew are together on almost every single one of the products that you might find out there in the world, and because of that, we as the public have made these terms interchangeable. They are very different. Mold is far more damaging than mildew. Mildew tends to grow on the surface of a substance. It's usually organic, typically plants, but it can grow on any porous surface. However, mold will grow inward on something. So if you see a spot, let's just say it's mold, we all know it is, okay, great. It's growing into the wall and reaching behind the wall and then spreading behind the wall where it propagates with its spores. Mildew does not do that. It stays on the surface, and mildew is kind of a strandy, fuzzy looking substance where if you were to smear it with your finger, it would feel very powdery. And it looks like small strands of like branches. It's very, very small, but that's the main difference. But the real difference in the property, for the property, is the damage that mold can cause versus mildew. Mildew is far easier to remove than mold, and there are far more species of mold than there are mildew. So that's one of the main misconceptions, is these two things are not the same. When we go into a property, we're trying to identify which is which, and then what type of which it is. So if it's mold, we need to find out what kind it is. So most people use these terms interchangeably. Mildew typically will appear first as small dots and then grow outward in a pattern, kind of like a spread pattern, but it does remain, again, on the surface of the substance that is growing on. That's very key. Mold quickly grows and propagates a little bit faster than mildew does, and it grows inwards, upwards, eating into walls, ceilings, and other surfaces, causing substantial property damage. Where you see a lot of cost come from is if a problem is not determined or discovered early, and it goes on and on and on. We find this typical in small leaks over time. One case we recently had was a refrigerator with an ice machine in it, had one of those small water lines into the wall behind it. And that water line had been drip leaking for a very long time. When it was discovered, the refrigerator was pulled out. We found that there was moisture on that wall and some microbial substances, some irregular staining, as it were. And when that wall was opened up, all of the studs in the wall behind it were covered with mold, and half of them were eaten away. The entire wall needed to be redone. That was a monumental cost for the buyer. One of the ways we can get ahead of that or get in front of it as best as possible, and I think I've mentioned this before in one of my other trainings with you folks, when we do an inspection, we'll use the refrigerator example again. We're going to walk right past that refrigerator because we don't inspect the refrigerator itself. However, if there is an ice machine in that refrigerator or any water lines attached to it, if that refrigerator can be moved so that my inspector can get behind it and reach behind it with a moisture meter and an infrared scanner, those kinds of things will help indicate if there is a problem or maybe had been a problem at one time behind that refrigerator. Again, that comes back to access to the property. And if we can get access to an area that may be in question, or we just want some peace of mind, if that access is provided for us, we'll do the investigating for you. And really, it's about identifying where the problems are. But again, that refrigerator has to be out of the way. So if somebody can move it, that's great for us. All right, go ahead, Michelle. All right, tips to prevent mold and mildew. So even if the house has no irregular staining, there's no unusual odor, and even if you have all the inspections and it turns out great, some of the things you can do to prohibit these things from happening in the home, because let's be honest, as sunny as it is in California all the time, it's not today, and it won't be this weekend. It does rain a lot, and moisture is the singular greatest enemy of a property. It promotes termite damage. It brings the termites out. It does damage itself. It can cause mold and mildew to grow. Mold and mildew need three things to thrive. They need food, they need air, and they need water. And depending on what type it is, it could need a little bit more of one of those things. Mold tends to grow on organic substances, and that means a lot of different things. Wood, organic. A tile is organic in a way. Most surfaces in the home can hold and have mold on them. If they're porous, the mold will grow right through them and get underneath them and get behind them, and then you can't see the damage it's doing. Much like termites. It's very, very similar to the termite aspect. So some of the things you can do to prevent this in your own home, in your client's home, you may want to write these tips down. I'll also send Michelle a copy of these slides so you guys have them and she can distribute them to you as you need. Keeping humidity level low between 30 and 50% in the house is ideal. You can use dehumidifiers, fans, opening windows, especially during humid months, to let that air kind of carry the moisture out of the home. Strangely enough, a family of 4 living in a home, 25% of the humidity in that house is generated by breathing and sweat. 25% just by having the people in the home. So opening things up and having a fan blowing or a dehumidifier really does mitigate these things. Obviously fixing leaky roofs, windows and pipes, ventilating bathrooms, laundry rooms, kitchens, basements, and other damp areas. Those of you who have used us before, you notice when we move through kitchens and bathrooms, we look for ventilation sources. Is this room properly vented? You've probably seen that in some reports, inadequate ventilation in such and such room. One of the reasons we mention that in our reports is for this very, very aspect, is to prevent mold and mildew. If there is no ventilation, or is there very little ventilation, or perhaps the vent fan isn't working, those are important because we are likely to find moisture issues, which include mold and mildew. Drying water damaged areas within 24 to 48 hours. That includes bathrooms. Again, back to bathrooms. Some of you have seen bathrooms where someone has taken a shower or a hot bath, and that steam and condensation lingers in that room for hours. That's usually not great. Eventually, over time, that moisture is feeding something. And if you have microbial growth somewhere in that bathroom, even if it's not immediately noticeable, it will grow, it will spread because basically it's being fed by that moisture, and moisture is the key ingredient for these. Regularly inspecting building exteriors for signs of leaks and other issues like cracked masonry, window frames, deteriorating flashing. These are all things that will help prevent the intrusion of moisture or the presence of moisture in great amounts and mitigate your possibility of getting mold and mildew in your home. So if you want to pass those tips on to buyers, great. If you don't, I would take this advice home and just pay attention to what your home looks like. All right. And go ahead. All right, real quick. This looks like a busy section, but it is worth mentioning. So mold versus efflorescence. Mold and efflorescence can look very much alike. So efflorescence dissolves in water, white mold does not. If it's rubbed between your fingers, efflorescence turns powdery, mold does not. And if you're not sure what efflorescence is, it's the residue left over from moisture, usually on concrete, brick, or any other like stone substance. You've probably seen it on outdoor walls, exterior walls. If you've ever seen photos of the crawl space underneath a home, it's very prominent there because there's a lot of moisture down there. And let me just go through this slide real quick and then I'll show you a couple of pictures. Mold can be any color because when it eats the substance it's on, it's absorbing that pigment. So it can be white, it can be blue, it can be black, it can be red. There's all kinds of colors. And we've all heard the term black mold. Black mold is actually used a little bit too generically, but it's supposed to try and indicate one specific type of mold. It's called Stachybotrys. And that is probably the most toxic mold. So when people say black mold, they immediately equate it to the most dangerous and toxic mold that is out there. Just because a mold is dark in color or perhaps even black does not mean it is Stachybotrys. That's why testing of the substance is so important. And I'll get to that in just a couple of minutes here. But it is worth noting that these things can appear in many, many colors. So efflorescence develops in organic building materials like concrete, brick. Mold, on the other hand, grows on organic materials such as wood. Sometimes you will see mold on things like concrete or brick because it can grow and feed on dirt and other organic substances on those surfaces. You will not find efflorescence in organic materials like wood, however. So there is that difference as well. If we can just go forward one more time, there's a couple of pictures I want to show, and I hope these show up clear enough. So on the left, we've got a brick wall, cinder block wall, and it's a very simple picture, and it looks like someone spray painted it, but that is actually residue from moisture. So it looks like maybe some sprinklers have been hitting this wall regularly, and the residue that water is leaving behind creates this efflorescence. So it's telling us that there is excessive moisture hitting this wall, which isn't the end of the world, but it does leave these unusual white stains on it. On the right, we've got either an attic or a subfloor. I can't quite tell from this picture, but that is actually white mold and they look incredibly similar. And the reason I wanted to bring that up is because the goal of inspecting for mold or mold spores or anything like that we do, the goal is to identify what we're dealing with. And if you were to walk by this property and this were the same property, it's not, but if it were, you might very well look at both and say, oh gosh, there's mold everywhere. But that may not be accurate. And you also want to stay away from the word mold because you're not sure. And it's because we're not certain that we need to leave that open. If you are certain, congratulations for your degree in mycology. And I'd like you to come work for me. But when we're not certain about the substances we're seeing, best not to comment on them, except to keep it very simple and say, there is staining on this wall, or there is staining on this board, that kind of thing. And leave it to the professionals and leave it in their court, because then it's their neck. It's their liability. It's their duty of care rather than yours. Your duty of care should be smaller than ours, and it is. When we get involved, our goal and our job is to test it, to identify it, and then report what it is so that the remediation can be pursued afterwards. And that's really the full thrust of this whole presentation is, here's what you might see, here's what you might know about it, but here's what to really do about it to find out for certain. Okay, we can roll forward one more time. As we all know, I hope, there are positives and negatives from mold. Mold and fungus, they're around us every day. Wherever you are, whatever room you're in, if you're in your car, if you're in your bedroom, if you're in the living room, you're surrounded by lots of types of mold. There's thousands of these things. Most of them are perfectly benign. Many of them are used in foods, medicines. Everybody hear of penicillin? That's a fungus, that's a mold. Cheese, wine, beer, they're all made with this stuff. So obviously, many of them are safe. It's the ones that aren't that we're trying to find and we're trying to identify. I'm going to guess that you might slice a wedge of cheese and have a little snack out of that, maybe a little sip of wine. That's great. You're consuming certain types of molds or fermenting funguses. But you're probably not going to swab the baseboard of a bathroom that has a black or green substance on it, and probably not going to eat that. That's my guess. So obviously there's a good place, there's a time and a place for all of these things, but if they are negative and they can promote allergies or they can exacerbate people with allergies, we want to find out what it is so we can attend to it properly. And worth noting, everybody's different. Everybody's body chemistry and experience and therefore their immunity is different. So you could have a family of 5 living in a home for 20 years. And the moment a new buyer moves in who might have a different sensitivity to the air, to the spores, to whatever happens to be in the home, even in small amounts, they could suddenly have problems simply because their body chemistry and their immunity is a little bit different than the people who lived there before. So it really depends on the buyer. If there is ever an odor in the room, if there is ever some obvious visual staining in the room, it's worth looking into and having them pay for a little bit of extra dollars to get these tests done to make sure, one, is it what we think it is? And if it is, what type? And then what to do about it. Real quick, one of the cool things about treatment nowadays is mold, again, grows inwards, so it spreads through objects and into the back. They used to have to pull apart whole walls to just get to the substance so that they could get rid of it. They now, and have been for several years now, they use enzymes, which are microbial things that feed on the mold. So wherever the mold is, no matter where it goes or grows, it will follow it through substances and eat it and destroy it in that way. So the cost is less, it's far more manageable. And it's those types of things that prevent the identification or presence of mold or mold substances in the house. It prevents that from being a real deal killer anymore, because they're not going to have to tear apart the house trying to find every last spore. And that would be insane. You'd have to knock the whole house down. And nobody wants that anyway. When someone's buying a house, they've got high hopes and they've got dreams and they've got, a great frame of expectation. And when that expectation is met with, yeah, you bought the house, here's the keys, but you can't move in for 4 weeks because we got to tear some walls out for you and do some cleaning, that kind of sours the experience. Mm-hmm. And we're not trying to sour the experience for you. We're trying to make it easier. So we can make you look better to your client and therefore keep you as a client ourselves. You've got a client in them for life, we hope. And that's really the goal too. All right, go ahead and roll forward. Okay. So we do, at an elite group, we do 2 different types of mold inspections. One of them is called a mold analysis. And what it's mainly for, in brief, is when you can visibly see a substance in the home, you want the mold analysis. I'll get to the other one in a minute, but if there's not something visible, but either there's an odor or there's just a concern on behalf of your buyer and they just want to know for sure, the best thing to do is an air quality test where we measure the air for the spore count of various types of molds, lots of them, as a matter of fact. So we're going to start with this one, the mold analysis. So if you order a mold analysis inspection from us, we're not just going to go in and swab what you can see and walk away. That is not the inspection. We are going to walk through the entire house and use the moisture meter and infrared scanners that we use every day to identify the presence of any moisture. We're going to check the baseboards throughout the whole house. We're going to check typical areas of moisture around windows, around door seals, bathrooms, kitchens, everything under the sink, around tubs, everywhere that moisture could collect and is likely to be, or maybe has even been identified in the normal home inspection. And the goal is When we find moisture, we're going to look for substances to swab. If we can find them and we can see them, great. If not, we also, as part of the mold analysis, we're doing all these other things. We will run some air samples as well. So we are also testing the air. So it's kind of like getting the air quality test and more all in one. Our goal is to identify the substance, so we will swab any visible substances found. Samples are then sent to a lab for testing to determine the type of growth we're dealing with. Most of the time, almost all of the time of the reports that I've seen over the years, the treatment or cleaning of this substance is pretty easy, mainly because it's not a majorly toxic mold. I can count on one hand the number of issues I've seen where a significant Stachybotrys or Aspergillus penicillin has been found. And those are the two we really look for. Those are the two that seem to cause people health problems, give headaches, nausea, dizziness, make your asthma 10 times worse, things like that. Those are the two baddies that we look for. And I can count on one hand the number of times we've actually found them in homes. It's usually some other type that you do want removed, you do want cleaned up, and you do want out of the house, and then prevent it from coming back. But they're not nearly as problematic as these other two can be. So again, we're trying to identify exactly what we're looking at. You can look at a book without any words on the cover and guess what's inside it all day, but you won't know it's War and Peace or whatever book it is until you open it and start reading it. That's what we do. That's what this is all about. The last part is the report. And the report of the mold analysis is going to show the findings of the growth that's present. It will be in a chart format, and there's usually definitions. Well, there's the scientific name of the mold. There's the definition of what it actually is, where it's likely to grow, what the treatment recommendations are. All that stuff is in there. And it's a long chart of anything we found. If there's multiple types, and sometimes there are, because we found some maybe in an attic, or we found some in a crawl space, but we also found some in the bathroom, they could very likely be different types of mold. And we want to know what to do with them. So that's really what your report's going to include. Typical turnaround time. This is important. The typical turnaround time for us to do the inspection, send the substances in swab form off to the lab, and get them back in full report form is typically 3 to 5 business days. Now, the reason that's important, and you guys already know the answer, you have a contingency window. We know this and you know this. And as the market gets a little warmer and things start to heat up, sometimes those contingency periods for competition's sake, for other offers, are going to get shorter. So get on the phone with us as early as possible, get the home inspector out there. And if they recommend doing these other things, every single home inspector carries a swab kit. Every single home inspector has an air pump to test the air. Even if you haven't ordered those other services, the guy or gal on premises with you for just the general home inspection is able to swab or do air samples should you require them or request them at the time. So you don't have to book a second appointment a couple of days later and then wait 5 more days for the report to come back. That's not how it works. We can actually accommodate you at the time of the initial inspection. The turnaround time is still 3 to 5 days, but you're far more likely to still be within your contingency window should you get it taken care of immediately. And yes, they are upgrades. Yes, there are additional costs. The inspector can go over those with you a little bit. It depends on the size of the home, depends on the number of swabs we do. The size of the home will indicate how many air samples we may need. There may only be one trouble area in the house, but we always take a sample of air from outside the home as a test sample, as a base sample, something to compare it to. If, though, you are having a specific air quality test done or a mold analysis test done or either inspection, we do recommend you create the worst case scenario possible. And what I mean by that is this. If I go to the home that you want to have air tested, I really would like it if you would close all the windows, seal it up real tight, and then don't run any air or fans or anything like that. Don't move the air, just let it sit. What we're trying to do is see if a family or a person were at the home for a day or two and everything was closed and nothing was running, what would they be breathing? And that's what we need to know, because those circumstances are likely and they are common. And if they don't live that way and they always have things open and fans running, that's great too. But in a worst case scenario, we need to test that air and figure out what they really are inhaling into their bodies and what they're absorbing, those kinds of things. So if we do the mold analysis or the air quality test for you, please close up everything at least 24 hours in advance of the inspection time. And then when we go in, we can test it and then you can open it up all you like. All right, let's move forward. Okay, so I kind of covered this a little bit, but the purpose of the indoor air quality test, as opposed to the mold analysis, is to identify, is when there's no visible substance or staining found. Okay, so we can't see anything, but maybe your buyer is maybe they're hypersensitive to molds and allergies and stuff anyway, and they just want to know for peace of mind. Wonderful, great, let's do it. And we can. So if you have a hypersensitive or allergic person as your clients, just for simple peace of mind, and also if there's no visible staining or substances found, but maybe there's an odor in the house, maybe there's a musty odor or a wet odor coming from somewhere and you're not sure where it is, the air quality test will not identify where it's coming from. It will only tell us if it's present in the house. And by it, I mean mold spores. That's all it's testing for. We don't test for radon, lead, asbestos, any of the other crazy stuff. We're just looking for mold. That's it, because that's really the enemy. We also, from this, want to identify the mold spore type and the count in the air. The descriptive report you receive from this will, again, define the mold types, and it'll give you a number based on the count per million, tens of thousands, whatever that number is, in the air at the time of the testing. And what that means is, you'll see a chart, think of in your head like an Excel spreadsheet with a bunch of numbers on it. So you've got names of mold types over here. You've got a black number, 315, 18, 240, whatever the numbers are. If they're in black, they're fine. They're either in a low enough count that it's normal or perfectly acceptable. But if there's a red field around it and the number is highlighted, and I think it's usually like a white number in a red field, unless they've changed it, the count is either higher than it should be, or it is at a problematic level for persons with allergies and sensitivities to these types of things. It's basically quite literally your red flag to take further action on, okay? And again, it depends on what type it is. If we do an air quality test and there's mold spores in the air that are red flagged, now we know that there's something growing, and if we can't see it, which is why we did the air quality test, chances are pretty good it's in a spot that we can't see, so it's already behind something. A very common cause of this is a leaky pipe within a wall. That happens all the time. It happens where water can collect on the bathroom floor, and the beginning of the growth is actually under the base of the baseboard. Again, it's an area that can get to the moisture, or the moisture can get to it, but we can't see it. So once we have an idea of what's in the house and where it might be, it's probably a good idea to have some moisture meters brought in, checked for these things, find out where the target areas are, and then at that point, yeah, you might very well have to open up some walls. So all of these things can help peace of mind, clear the air, so to speak, no pun intended, and find out and really do the investigative work that you, when you do your walkthrough, can't and shouldn't. Okay, that's why we do the deep dive, so you don't have to. Okay, so a couple more things real quick, and go ahead and go to the next one. So the causes of moisture intrusion, there's lots of these, and I could make 10 or 12 more slides with just pictures of examples, and you've seen many of these. One of the more common ones, and we're going to see it probably this weekend, if you are near a property and you ever see a pool of water like either of these structures have, there is a small puddle of water kind of in a muddy yard right up against the stucco. Now, it's probably not going to do anything bad to the stucco, but what's behind it? What's behind the stucco? And if mold starts growing on that stucco, can it grow through it? Absolutely it can. We've already talked about that. So what can happen is the air, the moisture, and the food is already present. Moisture in high amounts, air, obviously it's outside, so it's plenty. I see what looks like maybe a dryer vent on the side there. So this is probably the side of a garage, perhaps. And those are exposed studs inside. that wood could be getting eaten up and we wouldn't even know it unless we went in and swabbed it, tested it, and did the air test, something like that, or at least visibly got our eyes on it and looked, hey, is there something growing on any of these studs on the backside of where all this moisture sits? This next picture with the brick building, you can see it's actually affecting several points of the walls. And that's just one example. This is due to poor grading. So like, for instance, my house is on the south side of a street that leans towards the south. So all of the water that collects in my front yard collects up against a brick planter that buffers between my yard and my home. So the planter has wonderful drainage. The front of the yard in front of that brick planter doesn't necessarily, so all my water gathers up against my bricks. So let's say it rains this weekend and it's then dry and sunny and 80 for 5 months. 5 months from now, I will still have moss on the front of my brickwork on the planter, but it's not touching my home. And that's what's important to me. I don't care what color the bricks are. They can be green, red, I don't care. But as long as the moisture is not getting to my home, I'm in good shape, okay? So some of the other causes of moisture intrusion, and again, moisture is the enemy of a home. Pipe leaks, obviously, and that could mean a lot of things. It could mean a drip leak. It could mean a burst pipe somewhere. It could mean just a corroded pipe that's just dripping somewhere, and you may not notice it, will not notice it until it becomes a problem of a different kind, meaning it's soaking a wall, there's a stain, there's some sort of substance growing on the wall now or something, because if it grows from the backside, it's coming through to the front, right? That's what mold does. It goes through substances. Bad seals at windows and doors. A lot of people don't think about this one, but if you have a leaky window seal and it starts to get moisture inside the house, it's probably going to go right through the wall and right into the drywall where there's plenty of food, water, and then moisture. And then there could be all kinds of problems. Inadequate ventilation, we talked about that a little bit, and actually high water pressure. High water pressure, which is why one of the reasons that we check the water with a water regulator on the front of the property, we want to know that the pressure isn't so high because it is more likely to seep from the pipes, therefore causing a pipe leak, even a small one, if the pressure is too high. So if your pressure from the city is coming into the home at 130 PSI, then that's high. 80 to 100 is pretty normal. 80 is a little bit on the low side, but it's perfectly acceptable. It's not going to affect your water pressure in the home. But 80 to 100 is kind of where you want to be. If it's 120, 130, God forbid, 140, you're going to have problems with the pipes. And some of them aren't put together to hold that amount of pressure. So they will crack, they will fracture, they will seep, they will, spring leaks basically. And all of those things allow moisture into the home. And it may seem like your house is very resilient when you walk around it. You look at the walls and you look at the structure and you look at the ceiling, everything looks like it's a good solid shape. But if you start throwing water around in the house, you'd be amazed what it will do to the house. Please don't do that, but you'd be amazed at what would occur if you started throwing moisture in there, because moisture gets absorbed. It doesn't just evaporate. And that's the problem, is it gets absorbed into these substances and it promotes growth. Okay, let's go to the last one real quick, or next to last one. Okay, watch your language. I love this one, and I like the term. And the only reason I say it like this is there are hot button words in our world, in our industry, and both on our side and on your side. And there are things you just don't want to say. Like, for instance, I teach a class to my inspectors, and I call it watch your language, to be honest. It has nothing to do with mold, but it does have to do with if we can't get to, let's say, the attic, or we can't get under the crawl space because the opening is too small, or there's something we're prevented from doing. Do not ever say to a client or an agent, sorry, there's nothing I can do. Don't use that language. That is not language that is solving. We want to solve. We want to be the solution. Even if we can't do it and we're not able to do it, or something's blocking us, whatever, we still want to provide the or a solution to you. So it's a piece of language that we're trying very hard to omit. And habits are hard to break, let's be honest. But make your goal your habit. And our goal is to clean up our language. And I'm not talking about curse words. I'm talking about the things we say that might accidentally step on someone's sensitivities when it comes to the house, and especially your client. Because again, if we take care of your client the way you do, and you know them better than we do, we're going to make you look like rock stars because you partnered with the right people. Oh, those guys were great. They answered all my questions and they were very informative and they weren't alarming. And that's what we want. But in order to do that, we, like you, have to train and do masterminds and role playing and things like that. And we do. And that's a program that I run at our shop. So I talk to you folks here. I talk to them there. It's what I do all day. But in the course of dealing with mold and mildew, we want to avoid those words, specifically mold and mildew. I've heard people describe a smell as a mildewy smell because they're trying to describe a musty smell. I would much prefer you use the word musty or damp as a describing word for the smell that you're experiencing than the word mold or mildew. And the reason is this: it may not be either of those things. And if it's not, you've now raised the alarm slightly of your client. And we don't want to do that. We don't do it either. Believe me, we don't. It's not something we try to, we don't tread in that area because same reason. We don't want to alarm you or your client. That's very important to us. In fact, it's crucial. One of the other things, and this actually goes back to your ABIDs and your TDS, eliminate adjectives from your descriptions. I'll give you two examples. If there is a crack in the window, crack noted in window is all you need to put in your ABID. Do not put small crack. Do not put expanding crack. Don't put large crack. It's just a crack. That's it. Leave the rest to us to more finely tune that if it's necessary. If you want to add a description, describe what window it is. The window behind the television or the window next to the chimney, something like that to identify what window you're talking about, because window could be a little bit too vague. But just use the word crack. When we talk about staining, let's say we find some stains. Okay, there's a quote water stain. That's what we think in the ceiling in the living room. Please don't use the word water because you don't know that it's water. There could be rodents up in that attic. Possible, right? They could be relieving themselves in the attic and it's seeping through. So we don't know if it's water. Somebody could have a case of wine up there that broke, white wine seeped through. Because we don't know what it is, and specifically because we do not know what it is, leave it more vague. Say staining noted. And if you want to say where on the ceiling, great, that's fine. So we do much the same thing. We'll say staining noted behind toilet of master bathroom. That's what we say. Further evaluation recommended. And by that further evaluation language, this is again where we're watching our language, both to adopt good language and also omit bad language. The reason we recommend further evaluation is we're bringing to your attention that this is not meaning that the house is burning down, but this warrants extra attention that is outside of our scope of duty. Okay, so having an air test or a mold swab test or a whatever, having a termite inspector type of thing, we're going to always recommend you do the next step. And that's our job, is to identify what's there, report what we have found, and make the recommendation to seek further evaluation from an electrician, a plumber, a roofer, a mold specialist, whatever the case may be. And in that case, that could be us. So, and we can cover most all of those bases for you. We don't do repairs. We do not do the remediation for mold or mildew. We do not get involved in those things because it would bias us with our inspections. And we need to stay in our lane just like you need to stay in yours. So that's very crucial to us too. And the last thing, and I cannot emphasize this enough, never, ever, ever, ever comment on what is unknown. There's a certainty you can have by knowing something, and there's an uncertainty. If there's an uncertainty with you, either don't comment on it or leave the language as vague as possible. And really, that's the watch your language in a nutshell. And it's important, and we have to be aware of what we're saying and aware of what that statement or that comment has on who we're discussing things with. And it's a tip that I give to all of you, and I would challenge you. Spend the next week listening to yourself. How do I sound when I say things? And it's not the tone necessarily, but specifically, what are you saying? We had a meeting this morning with our people, and one of the gentlemen was trying to describe someone's manner, because she can come across as very brief and abrupt and even curt at times, but she's a very direct person. She's not a fluff speaker. She doesn't talk like I do on and on and on about all kinds of stuff. She's very direct and to the point, but that can be construed by other people as rude. And there are some people in our organization who have dealt with her that she's like, why is she so rude all the time? She's not. She's one of our best people. She works in our call center, as a matter of fact. She answers the phones. And she's probably one of the best people to get on the phones because she will find you a spot. She will book your appointment perfectly, and she'll recommend and talk to you about the services that may be necessary that you may not have even thought of. Because she's very particular and direct and succinct with everything she does. It's how she thinks. But in the course of normal conversation, she may come across, especially in an email or a text where you can't hear her, she may come across as very abrupt and very brusque. And it turns some people off. I said, nope, she's probably the best person we've got on the phones. So an awareness of what you say and how you sound is very, very, very important. I take this to heart. It's why I train our guys on what to say, what not to say, what things to avoid, and what to listen for if they hear their own people saying things that we don't really want to put out there. And again, it's not curse words. It's just the language we use every day has become our habit. And in order to make your goal to be a better communicator, your habit, you need to change those. And that's all it really is. All right. That is basically it in a nutshell. If you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer anything you've got. Please make them easy. If you guys want to type them in the comments, or if you want to unmute yourselves, or however Michelle wants to do that, that'd be great.
Okay, does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, can you elucidate again on the grading?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Can you elucidate again, explain again the grading you said about
the grading of the property? Sure.
correct.
Basically what happens commonly is homes are graded to be either flat or sloped towards, for drainage, to get the water off of the property, especially when we've had rains like we have this year, where it will rain for multiple days at a time. Eventually that water will pool up. Now, if you're ever at a property during or slightly after that time, and you can see where the water has lingered, and if it's up against the house, there may be moisture issues on that portion of the house. Maybe. Again, I'm using vague language because I am not certain, and nor would you be. But they are indicators of where problems might be. So the things to watch for. Underneath foundations, where there's crawl spaces underneath the house. That sub area has to be sloped in such a way or create drainage in such a way to allow moisture to go out from under the home. Because when it rains, water will collect under there, the soil gets very, very wet. And if that yes.
Carlos, we can't hear you. Carlos?
We were hearing you, but it wasn't coming through very clear. Sorry.
Okay, maybe he just muted himself.
Okay.
Is there any other questions?
So if the floor grading of the foundations or the floor of the front house, we're talking about how the sloping of the floor.
Right. And it's mainly the ground that the house is on. Now, one of the other things we do is we have a foundation review specifically for crawl spaces as part of one of our inspections. It does cost a little bit of extra money, but what that will determine is if the crawl space flooring or the ground, the earth, is set for proper drainage. It's one of the things that we can check for also. But really the best place to start, and it always is the best place to start. Please don't spend $10,000 on all the inspections we do, please. But start with the general home inspection, and that will lead to additional recommendations. And if there are moisture issues through the general inspection and follow up perhaps with an air quality or a mold analysis, if there's substances found in the home, we can determine more or less where that's coming from. And our general inspectors, again, they're general inspectors because they kind of look at everything in a general way. They may not be able to rebuild the foundation, the subfloor of the home, but they can certainly get down there, look at it, and be able to tell from things that they've seen in the past and things they can compare it to, whether there may be an issue there already. And again, that doesn't cost any extra money. But if you ever have a home that you're looking to help a buyer get into, and you think that there might be some issues, bring it to the inspector's attention when we show up and say, hey, could you just make sure that the grading looks proper around this house? And none of my guys will say no. Every single one of them will spend the extra 5, 10, 15 minutes to walk the perimeter of the house, look at the yard, look at where some dips or what we call pools might be in the grass, in the yard, in the planters, things like that. And there are lots of indicators we look for on the exterior of a home that help us clue into whether excessive moisture has been a problem there or not. Even with sprinklers, you know, when sprinklers hit a wall repeatedly, they leave evidence.
Yeah.
And we look for that evidence. So did I answer your question though?
Are there any other questions from any
Yeah.
other agents while we're?
Excuse me. So following up that grading issue, whatever, if there's a grading issue, issue that could cause kind of water and there's no it could that.
Are you looking for like what to do about it if the grading is bad? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Okay, so if the grading of the property is not proper, there are a couple ways you can go about it. You can hire a grading expert or a drainage expert, and that's where I would go first. That's the very first call I would make. There is a group I think they're based in Los Angeles. They're called Alpha Structural, and they are wonderful for handling drainage and other grading issues.
So that's a great tip. Thank you. Does any other agents have questions before we conclude the meeting? I have a question. I notice on the back of your card that you do request for repair price reports.
Yes.
Okay, so how does that work?
Glad you asked. Okay, every inspection we do, every home inspection for single family homes and condos automatically include a repair pricer report.
Oh.
What that is, there's no additional cost. Here's what will happen. I'm going to describe what it is, and I'm going to describe the process of how you get it. So what the repair pricer is repairpricer.com. They take our report and they go through the summary item by item, and they give an estimate for the cost of repair or replacement of those items in red on the report. So then, and I have agents that do this, you could literally staple that to your request for repairs to the seller. And I have agents that do it. They literally send the report with their request for repairs. Do they get them all? I have no idea. Every deal is different. But that's what they do because they find so much value in negotiating with this tool. How to get it is this. When our report is ready, we've done the inspection, we've uploaded it, it's been paid and signed for, and it's all ready to go, and you can open it. You will receive an email from Repair Pricer, and it'll say, like a preview of the Repair Pricer report is, okay, your preview estimate is $8,000. Okay, that's the round number of what the full report would show. Would you like the full report? There's a little box, and you click yes. When you click yes, you then go to a new screen where you can, by your choice, edit off any of those line items that you don't want on your full report. Okay, it's not eliminating them from the inspection report. It's just, do you want the fire or the smoke alarm included on the price report that you're going to get? It's a $20 fix, so probably not, who cares? But you can edit which ones you want to see, which ones you don't on the final product. From the time you click yes and order that Repair Pricer, it's 24 hours. Normally it's a little less sometimes, but 24 hours until you get that report. So here's the timeline. Let's pretend today is Monday, so we're not on the cusp of a weekend. So you do the inspection today, it's Monday. You get our inspection report by Tuesday latest. You get the Repair Pricer order request on Tuesday. You say yes, you'll have your Repair Pricer on Wednesday. Just to give you a timeline to work within your head, because again, timelines are important, time element is crucial, and you guys are under a contingency period that you need to fall within in plenty of time to make responses to the seller.
Thank you. That's interesting. Does anybody else have any questions before we log off?
I do. This is Sylvia.
Hi, Sylvia.
Hi. Just a quick question. I like that very much, what you just explained, and I wanted to know, is your fee posted on the brochures you provide to us, or can you give it to us right now so that we know how much, to let the buyers or sellers know how much, to look for?
I'm glad you asked, and here's I apologize. The answer to the question is it depends, and here's why. I'll give you the baseline, but it probably won't answer the question you're looking for. The price for our inspections is based on the property type and the square footage. And
Correct.
they're not the same, but let me give you.
Right, but do you have that broken down on the brochure?
Not on the brochure, no, but
Got
you know what I can do? I'm gonna send you guys our price sheet for LA and Orange County properties, just so you have a guideline to work with, and I'll send that to Michelle along with these slides, so you guys have them in the office. You
Thank
guys
you.
can refer to them anytime.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we need that price range. Thank you.
Oh.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think that's going to conclude our meeting. And I thank you very much, Brent, for coming in. This was really informative. I personally learned a lot, and I know our agents did. So I wish you all a wonderful weekend ahead. And if nobody else has any questions, I'm going to conclude the meeting. All right. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Enjoy your weekend. And it's been nice to see you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye.